Welcome back to our third installment of our series on Elijah the prophet in medieval Ashkenaz. In this session, I'd like to focus on Elijah, the angel of covenant, and how Elijah the prophet has come to have such a significant presence in circumcision ceremonies. And what does his presence signify specifically in circumcision ceremonies held in medieval Ashkenaz? And that is where we are going to focus today. So first, I'd like to recap a little bit what we spoke about in our previous installments. So we talked about the characteristics of Elijah inherited to the scholars and rabbis and people in the Jewish communities of medieval Ashkenaz that are inherited from the biblical descriptions of Elijah the prophet, prophesizing and his miracle work and his fire and brimstone nature of admonishing the kingdom of Israel, and his miraculous and very special ascension to heaven in a fiery chariot. And we discussed a little bit in the book of Malachi a promise of an Elijah returning. Then we discussed how the rabbis formulated Elijah, and then in our second installment we discussed about Elijah's roles at the end of days, eschatological stage with what characters and what Elijah is supposed to do, and also how the character of Elijah really represents the dialogue, and he's kind of a flashpoint of the differences between Christian identity and Jewish identity in medieval Ashkenaz surrounding what will happen to Jews at the end of days, and through the filter of the question of the Jews at the end of days, what is the interaction in the historical present between these two communities, and how the Christians had the Antichrist narrative that Elijah is going to be able to convince the Jews to accept Christ before his second coming, and the Jews' very adamant stance that Elijah has always and will always stand for loyalty to the God of Israel, and they see themselves as continuing that loyalty. So bringing all that together, these are big ideas, these are thoughts and scholarly concepts and traditions that are being passed down in all kinds of singular manuscripts and student to teacher and teacher to student. And how does these themes reach the wider audience? How does this understanding of Elijah become part of the lives of these communities? And one wonderful way of bringing ideas into everyday life and personal identity of the individual in the group is through rituals and through ceremonies, and especially a ceremony that brings together the entire community in its presence. So I'm going to start with how Elijah is even connected to circumcision ceremonies, and then we are going to discuss how it is seen specifically in medieval Ashkenaz. So we have a midrashic compilation called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. It was most likely redacted in the 8th century Palestine and Eretz Israel, and it really discusses it follows the biblical narrative, and from the creation of the world until sometime when the Israelites are in the desert. So really covers most of the narrative part of the Pentateuch. And when describing the trials of Abraham, the 10 trials of Abraham, one of them is the commandment to circumcise. And so, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, the compilation brings together all kinds of midrashic traditions that have to do with circumcision, and that have to do with the connection between Abraham and God, and then Abraham's descendants and God, and then the nation of Israel and God through circumcision, and that bond. And circumcision is called Brit Milah, the covenant of circumcision, and it is understood as the physical expression of the spiritual covenant between God and Israel. So we have all these themes coming together, and Elijah appears at the end. So we have a description from Abraham down through Egypt, through all kinds of events and discussions of Abraham's descendants and their relationship to circumcision, and all the way at the end, we come to Elijah's historical time in the Bible. Thus, the Israelites were accustomed to circumcise until they were divided into two kingdoms, which we know about from the book of Kings. The kingdom of Ephraim cast off from themselves the covenant of circumcision. Elijah, may he be remembered for good, arose and was zealous with a mighty passion, and he appealed to the heavens to send down neither dew nor rain upon the earth. So here we have an elaboration on the biblical story, that what Elijah was so upset about and what Elijah took his zeal out about was the stopping circumcision in the kingdom of Ephraim. And then Queen Jezebel heard of this, and he runs away to the desert, and eventually he makes his way to Mount Horeb, and this is all in the biblical text. And then we have the revelation that Elijah has on Mount Horeb, and it is expanded. We have here in the text an expansion of the dialogue between God and Elijah. So following the biblical text, then there the Holy One, blessed be he, was revealed to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered to him, "I have been very zealous." This is in the biblical text. And then we have the Holy One said to him, to Elijah, "You are always zealous by thy life. The Israelites shall not observe the covenant of circumcision until you see it done with your own eyes." This is very interesting. God says to Elijah, "Who are you to decide that they are no longer going to be part of this covenant?" Basically, God says to him, it is the Israel's covenant with me. I haven't forsaken them yet. I haven't decided to be zealous towards them for discontinuing this practice. And it will come back. And I have faith in my chosen nation. And you will see with your own eyes that the Israelites will continue to practice circumcision and the expression of the covenant through circumcision. We discussed at the end of the first session that there's a shift of Elijah being zealous for God and taking it out on Israel, that he feels that they are not serving God the way they should. And his shift in the Midrashic text and post-biblical texts and traditions and through the lens of the rabbis to a figure that is zealous for Israel towards God and asking God to act on behalf of Israel and save them from all their hardships. So here we still have a little bit of that shift. We still have Elijah being zealous for God, admonishing Israel. And God sends him to see every circumcision and bear witness. And right away, in the next sentence, we already have the other side of Elijah. Hence, the sages instituted that custom that people should have a seat of honor for the messenger of the covenant. We'll get back to that. Because Elijah is called the messenger of the covenant, as it is said, "And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he approaches." And then ask if Elijah is the one who is harbinger of the redemption. "O God of Israel, hasten and bring the Messiah in our lifetime to comfort us." So we have here a really interesting flip. At first we say, oh, God is punishing Elijah that he has to come to every single circumcision. And then right away it is turned into a seat of honor. And we want Elijah to come. And his presence is blessed and his presence is positive. And we want to honor him and bring him. And it also reminds us that he is connected to redemption. Now, messenger of the covenant comes also from Malachi. So the word malach in Hebrew also means angel and also means messenger. So Elijah works here on both planes, because he's also an angelic character, no longer living an earthly life and traveling between heaven and earth. And he is also the messenger bringing information back from heaven to earth and earth to heaven, as we have discussed. So he is the Malach HaBrit, messenger, angel of the covenant, and the covenant, one of the ways that it is shown in the world, and one of the ways that it is practiced, is through circumcision. So this is the base text of how we have Elijah coming to circumcision ceremonies. Of course, it is all based on the Malachi text. We have the messenger in the beginning of Malachi 3, and we have Elijah the prophet returning at the end of the same prophecy. And through Brit, through circumcision, through covenant, they are all tied together. The beginning character of the messenger and the angel of the covenant and Elijah the prophet, and coming before the advent of the great and terrible day of the Lord, they all come together into Elijah. And he personifies all these aspects. Elijah is the angel of covenant of circumcision. Okay, but in the last time when we discussed these verses and their relationship to Elijah and the legacy that they leave, we focused more on why he would appear. Why is Elijah the character most fitting to fulfill this role? And today, I would like to focus on the material culture. I would like to discuss not so much why Elijah is the correct, most fitting personality to show up, but how he is made present. We've discussed the ideas, we've discussed the rationale, we've discussed the traditions, and now how are they made present? How is Elijah's presence seen by everyone in the community, when we will see later on that he is not always seen by everyone's eyes, which is another interesting aspect. But we'll get to that later. What I want to really discuss is the physical ways, and also the liturgical ways and the storytelling ways that a community makes room for Elijah, and through that makes room and resonates the values and the messages that Elijah carries with him. So, yes, we've discussed Elijah's zealousness that he carries through also into circumcision ceremonies. And we will see that this zealousness will come up in the connection to Phinehas, which we discussed a little bit before. They are the only two characters the only two figures in the Bible who have the attribute of being zealous, and it will come up in the liturgy of circumcision ceremonies, the connection between Elijah, Phinehas, zealousness, and covenant, and peace, which is interesting. Okay. We have Elijah's chair not only appears in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, but what is very special about this custom, this physical material culture custom, is that we find it appearing in all kinds of written sources. So unfortunately, we don't have chairs of Elijah that have survived from earlier than the end of the 17th century, really from the 18th century. And that has factors to do with what materials there were and what the uses were, and we'll discuss that a little bit. But what's really interesting is that it's a custom that's not only found in this Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer from the 8th century and rediscovered in a modern time when people interested in ethnography and practice are looking again and saying, I wonder why people have been doing this for so many years. Let's go back to the sources and mine the early medieval things that we have and see if we can find a reason. What's really cool is that we actually have mentions and explanations following through all the generations of this custom. And as early as the 10th century, we have two Geonim, two leaders, Jewish leaders of the Geonic period, who are describing not only the use of the chairs for Elijah in the circumcision ceremony, but also how they were used in real life. So first we have Rav Shira Gaon, who just describes, it is the custom of Israel to prepare a cathedra. A lot of the sources use the term cathedra in Hebrew. It's also a word used in modern Hebrew to describe a chair in the sense of an honored position. So we have this Greek word that is absorbed into the written source in Hebrew. And so it's a special chair. It's a chair with status. Prepare a cathedra covered in fabric near the Baal Brit, in honor of Elijah, who is called Messenger of the Covenant, as explained in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. So they are also going back to the proof text, the common source. And because of this, the people prepare a seat in honor of the Messenger of the Covenant, who is Elijah the prophet. So we have here a repetition and a ratification of the connection between Elijah and covenant, Elijah and Malachi's prophecy of return. And these themes are all tied together really nicely. So we have here that we have a Baal Brit, we have a person who is holding the baby physically, and beside that person is another chair decorated in fabric to honor Elijah. We don't really know from here where the Baal Brit is sitting. So we can leave it at that. And a little bit later, we have Nisim Gaon telling about what he was told about his very own circumcision. The elders told me that on the day of my circumcision, my father entered the synagogue holding me in his arms and sat for a time in the prepared seat, and then stood and sat in the other chair of circumcision. So here we have two chairs. Later, they asked him why, because they hadn't seen that done before. He told them, I received from my ancestors that this chair is prepared for Elijah, and he is the messenger of the covenant. I sat with the child, and perhaps Elijah will bless him, and he will find wisdom from the blessing. So first of all, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the person who is telling it is now the head of the community and the head of Judaism in the diaspora for his time. So Elijah did help bless him with wisdom from God. And also we see here an extension of the chair, not only standing in place to signify Elijah's presence and remind the community that Elijah is a guest of honor at the circumcision, but also there is an inherent value to the chair itself. It becomes a source of blessing. There is a feeling or an idea, a belief that Elijah's presence is really there, connected to the chair, and it will bestow good tidings. He will bring good blessings. He will enrich the child. They are honoring Elijah's presence beyond just mentioning it, beyond making space for him, but actually there is inherent value and a positive essence and a positive presence that is being acknowledged and asked for and hoped for. Okay, so we've seen that Elijah's chair is being used in practice. And now we are going to jump to our main characters, our main area of discussion, which is Ashkenaz in the Middle Ages. So you are all familiar with this map before. I'm reminding us where we are. And now we are going to look a little bit at the sources that we have from Ashkenaz in the Middle Ages that are discussing specifically Elijah's presence at circumcision ceremonies. Now, this appears a lot because the sources that discuss customs will discuss how to perform a circumcision in a acceptable way technically and halachically, and also safety. There's a lot of discussion of how to keep the baby safe and what are signs to postpone the circumcision and things like that. So here, what's interesting is that we are in a time where people have to write their own texts. And you don't go back to a source that you can, consult a critical edition, and everybody has to copy their own. So we find a lot of times little shifts in the copying. We find little shifts in the way that things are phrased that tell us a lot about the person who is copying them. And one of these examples is in Machzor Vitri. Machzor Vitri is a prayer book, and incorporates a lot of halachic rulings and a lot of traditions that were practiced in the community that it served, and a little bit after the time of Rashi. And he's also copying he's going to base himself on Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, but the details are going to be a little bit different. So first he explains, when he's explaining how to set up for a circumcision ceremony, 2 cathedra are prepared and covered in fabric or other ornament of decoration. So we see here a continued theme. Now we have 2 chairs that are decorated nicely. This one is for Elijah, who comes and sits there and sees the execution of the commandment. He has to actually see it. I found in the Midrash, and then he opens a quote, and we're jumping just to the end. Such was done until Jeroboam's reign grew and abolished circumcision. Okay, they stopped circumcising in the kingdom of Ephraim. We know this. What is the new detail? Elijah came and returned it. Not only as we see in the biblical text, that Elijah is reprimanding Israel for leaving the covenant. Here we have Elijah reinstating circumcision. It's an extension. God said to him, "You were vigilant about circumcision. By thy life, that every time my sons fulfill this commandment, you will stand among them." Interesting. Here in this version, God is not saying, "You doubted my sons, and therefore you will have to go and see that they are still performing circumcision and have not renounced it. You will go and see that you were wrong." No, in this version in Machzor Vitri, God is saying, as a reward to Elijah for being so vigilant and returning circumcision and not letting this practice of expression of the covenant be lost, you will have the honor of seeing my sons fulfill this commandment every time. You will stand among them and see your legacy. So here we have Elijah coming to circumcisions in medieval Ashkenaz and North France, where Vitry is, and being the guest of honor of come see. We are doing things correctly. We are performing what we should be performing, just like you want. And this theme of Elijah coming and seeing and what that means for the self-identity of the Ashkenazi Jews is, in the Middle Ages, is very important. So, and then the last line, the other chair is for the Baal Brit, who sits there and the child is on his knees. So now we know that the Baal Brit has his own chair, and the circumcision is performed on the lap of the Baal Brit. Okay. Our next source is from a very interesting book called Guidebook for Circumcisers, written by Rabbi Jacob the Cutter and his son, Rabbi Gershom, son of Jacob the Cutter. Now the Cutter is, of course, that they were mohalim. They were professional circumcisers. And at this time of the 13th century, It's part of the tail end of the 12th century Renaissance. We have a reorganization of information in Europe. And one of the things that emerges are small compilations, legal compilations, and also technical legal, Jewish texts of how to perform certain rituals that have a lot of complicated details. For one is kosher slaughter of animals, or how to prepare kosher food, or ritual purity laws, or a guidebook for circumcisers. So we are starting to have professional texts emerge, and that is a really interesting genre and social and intellectual phenomenon to explore. But what works wonderfully for us is that Rabbi Jacob the Cutter writes this guidebook. He puts a lot of information in it about how he performs the circumcisions, and one of the things he discusses is preparing the chairs for the Baal Brit and for Elijah. And he writes, 2 cathedra are prepared with decorated cushions on them and covered with fabric or anything else expensive or ornamented for the splendor of the ritual. The first is for the Baal Brit to sit, and the second is for Elijah the prophet, who comes and sits and sees the performance of the circumcision. Until now, all themes that we've seen. And what does he add? Elijah testifies to it. Elijah now is becoming a witness. He has to sit and see the performance of the circumcision so that he can testify it. He has to be a proper witness, a loyal witness to Israel continuing to perform the circumcision properly as part of their covenant with God. The Jews of medieval Ashkenaz want Elijah to see that how much effort they are putting into continuing the practice of circumcision. Another very interesting thing is we've seen a few sources now discuss that these cathedra are decorated with fabric. In a different context, while exploring furniture and exploring the material culture of this historical era, furniture, chairs, tables, stools were more simple and lightweight and less ornamented. And households would usually use storage boxes and crates to be able to use for storage inside, and then you can sit on a crate or use it as a table. So furniture was cheaper and lighter and less fancy. If you wanted to make something special, then you'd use special fabric. And fabric and cushions were more expensive and more elaborate than the furniture underneath, which is interesting when we look at old sources and think, well, why did they have to decorate it? Why not just use a nice chair? That was how they made things pretty, and that's how they made things elevated and rich, was through the ornamentation and less the object itself. So, okay. So why were Jews in Ashkenaz so eager for Elijah to bear witness of circumcision? So, first of all, they had a pride in observation of circumcision in the face of the challenge of actually performing it. Being a minority within a large Christian majority, that the Christian majority dispelled with circumcision very, very early on. Circumcision is one of the oldest and most central bones of contention between Jews and Christians, because already in the letters in the New Testament we have the rejection of circumcision of the flesh and adoption of circumcision of the heart. So continuing to perform this very physical act, this is taking a stance and putting yourself sort of at risk. Not always is the risk so acute and physical and lethal, but it's always uncomfortable. And it fluctuates through generations and through relationships. And so there's this deep pride of we are still doing this, we are continuing this. And also the connection that observance of circumcision also has a connection to redemption. It has a connection to salvation. Also personal for the community member himself, the baby that is being brought into the fold of the community through circumcision. And also the whole community, beyond Elijah witnessing that that the Jews are continuing to perform circumcision, even when it is a challenge from their surroundings. There is also the belief that observance of circumcision promotes salvation and promotes redemption. Also on a personal level, the child that is being circumcised is now being accepted into the community, and their personal status changes and shifts, and he is a full Jew now, a full member of the community, and can merit salvation in his personal life and personal death later on at an old age. And also communal redemption, that continuing to perform circumcision and continuing to ratify their covenant with God brings them closer to redemption. And also having a ceremony that is performed in the communal space of the synagogue. It is the center of the Jewish community. Traditionally, circumcisions in Ashkenaz were performed early in the morning so that as many community members as possible could attend before dispersing for their daily tasks and work. They can all come together and be there. And it is an opportunity for the entire congregation to come together and ratify and express again their loyalty to God and His commandments, and within themselves to strengthen their personal identity as part of the group and the group identity together. So we have Elijah coming and being kind of the right figure to look at all these things, because he also is connected to these things on his own. And we'll see that going forward. Now, one central theme in Ashkenaz when discussing circumcision is also the juxtaposition to sacrifice, and especially the sacrifice of Isaac. Because Isaac in the Bible, in Genesis, although Abraham was commanded to circumcise himself, Isaac is the first child born to a circumcised father and the first to be circumcised at 8 days. So he's the first child that is circumcised according, starting this tradition when it's already in its fullest capacity. And he is also part of the scene of a sacrificial scene. And these two things were very linked in Ashkenaz, also through reminding God of having merits from ancestors, having the patriarchs' protection because of the acts of the patriarchs and the matriarchs provide merits all through the generations to their descendants. And also because it is Abraham's steadfast faith. And something very central to the Ashkenazi community self-identity was loyalty to God and His commandments in the face of everything, even to the point of sacrifice, either self-sacrifice or sacrifice of their children. And this is a shift that happens after 1096, after the First Crusades, and Jews are put to the choice of death or the cross, and then they have to figure out how they want to respond to a reality that at any time they might be asked to choose between their faith and their life, and living in a way where they are trying always to be on the level that they will always choose their faith. So we have a lot of connections between sacrifice and circumcision has turned into such a central identity factor. And Elijah can come, and we spoke about Elijah on Saturday nights in our first session, and Elijah as collecting merits. Elijah as witnessing on Saturday night, sitting under the tree of life and recording the names of those who kept the Shabbat. And he is the witness to Israel's good deeds and keeping the commandments. And he can function also in the same way in circumcision ceremonies as collecting and recording, witnessing the act and recording it, and also seeing the merits of the community as they continue to perform the covenant of circumcision. Okay. Now, I brought a couple of sources that discuss circumcision, the idea of it in the community, and what it says about self-identity. So in the present, Rabbi Eliezer of Worms, very central figure in 12th century and 13th century, writes in the context of his discussion on circumcision, and Israel continues to perform circumcision with joy because it bears witness to Israel to the world, because the circumcision is in Israel's bosom and cannot be removed. So in the present, he is declaring the pride. He is declaring that is not something that should be hidden. It is something that Israel bears with intentionality and showing that they are in covenant with God. So in this present, and it also carries to the future. So Rabbi Jacob the Cutter brings a midrashic tradition. They sang, then Israel sang. After the splitting of the Red Sea, after the redemption from Egypt, in the future, Israel will sing. Not only are they singing in the present of their exodus from Egypt and after the miracle of the splitting of the sea, but they will also sing in the present because the verb of they will sing. It's an interesting part of the sentence. The numerical value of the word as in the future is 8. Aleph is 1, Zayin is 7, together it is 8 in Gematria. From here we learn that by the merit of circumcision that is performed traditionally on the 8th day after birth, the Redeemer will come to Israel. Here we have an expression of how circumcision is seen as helping bring about the redemption, helping bring about in the future. And we will discuss next week how the themes of Passover, circumcision, Elijah, blood, and redemption are all connected together. So stay tuned. Okay. Now, we spoke about Elijah's chair as a physical ritual of making space that is inside the ceremony. And we also have other things that came and went. What's special about Elijah's chair is that we have very early testimony and we have a continuity until the present day. But not every ritual and not every custom stands the test of time. And this is one example. According to my uncle, again, Rabbi Jacob the Cutter is showing that, testifying about himself, that he is related to another very prestigious rabbi of Ashkenaz in the Middle Ages, Rabbi Ephraim of Bonn. So he heard from his uncle that there was this custom, again connecting Egypt, the exodus from Egypt and circumcision, which we will talk about next week, but here's just the beginning. The sages say that the Israelites were redeemed from Egypt on behalf of 2 blood sacrifices, Passover and circumcision. The Israelites posted the blood of the Paschal lamb on their doorposts as a sign to publicize the miracle. Therefore, one hangs the sheet on the entryway to publicly display the sign of the covenant by circumcision, to publicize the trial of the commandment. So here he is explaining that the sheet that is laid underneath the baby, or his diaper or something, swaddling cloth, that is stained from the blood of the circumcision, because it is a surgical procedure that needs to bleed in order to be complete. That sheet, that cloth, is then hung on the entryway of the synagogue to publicize that a circumcision was performed. Now, it is very interesting that it is plastered right up there and shown publicly. And this saying, we're not afraid. We are going to show that we are continuing to circumcise. But it probably was a very short-lived custom, because hanging sheets with circumcision blood on them probably did not go over very well in the wider context of living in Christian Europe. And we only have 2 short passages that remain to tell us that this custom existed. But it fits very much into how circumcision was understood by the community. Okay, so we saw that Elijah is connected is connected to the circumcision long before there were these Ashkenazi communities. But his presence was so important to them, and they wanted to emphasize his connection to it, also because of who he was, the biblical Elijah, zealot for God of Israel and the observant of commandments. And they wanted to show that they have the same self-identity. They see in Elijah a reflection of themselves, the same kind of constitution of standing for the God of Israel, and that's in the present. And in the future, Elijah is also can bring the testimony of them adhering to circumcision towards God, and bring about the wheels of redemption to start moving them a little faster. Okay. We've been focusing on the chairs today, and that is the material side of it, and the actual physical object that even not the most learned members of the community can see that they're there. But it's not only in the objects that Elijah is mentioned. And a lot of the liturgy discusses Elijah. If it's in special poems that are added into the regular prayers of the day, if the circumcision is early in the morning, it is usually part of the morning prayer service, and special liturgical poems called piyutim are added in about the discussing circumcision themes. And some of the main themes that come up that have to do with Elijah are his zealotry, and then there's a connection to Phineas, and a connection that they're both zealous, but they will also bring about peace. They also have this promise that God said to Phineas, I will give you the covenant of peace. So we have the angel of covenants, and we have both of them zealous. So it connects together. Oh, if he has this brit, he has this covenant of to be a messenger for, it will also be this covenant that the other zealous one has. That's the covenant of peace. So we have that coming together. And we have a description of the chairs, that you bring the chairs to that you prepare the chairs. And we have themes of redemption, and also discussing why Elijah comes to the circumcision ceremony, how to set things up. And one interesting thing, okay, and so we have, this is just one example. I brought it also in the text that's easier to read in typed out, and also in a manuscript version. Okay, so let's recap. And what we have been discussing. We started with ideas. We started with themes. We started with the puzzle pieces of Elijah's multifaceted character, lots of contradictions, lots of different threads, lots of things that Elijah can do. And Elijah is coming with this big collection of attributes into medieval Ashkenaz. We discussed how Elijah is seen in apocalyptic traditions, how that developed and what his tasks are going to be, and how the Jews of medieval Ashkenaz saw him as very steadfastly loyal, and he will reward those who remain loyal to the God of Israel and who do not accept everybody who comes and says that they are a Messiah. No, Elijah will let the loyal remnants of the Jews know who the real Messiah is, and he will perform miracles for them, and he will participate in all the miracles of the redemption, and also part of the vengeance on those who gave Israel and the Jews a hard time in the diaspora. Then we saw how this figure of Elijah is coming into circumcision ceremonies, that Elijah was invited into circumcision ceremonies from very early on in late antiquity sources, and from the beginning of the Middle Ages, we see that the tradition of having Elijah's presence signified through a chair in circumcision ceremonies follows and spreads through the Jewish diaspora. And we've discussed the very specific meaning that his presence has in medieval Ashkenazi circumcision ceremonies being so central to these Jewish communities, understanding and discussing for themselves their identity and how they see their present existence and their future, and how Elijah plays into that and mirrors that for them. And a little bit we discussed the material culture of how Elijah's presence is signified. And next week, in our last installment, we are going to discuss how all these things come together and how Elijah was introduced into the Passover Seder through objects that express his existence, and how Elijah's existence is expressed in Jewish culture through objects and through ceremonies and through rituals up until the present day. Thank you very much.